Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Southern Shadows and Dust. We're in beautiful downtown Canoe, Alabama on a Saturday morning in the fall, October 1st. And we're sitting here at a place that was a center of life in Canoe back in the day of rail transport. The old depot in Canoe sat right about where I'm at, right in this area. And a lot of things happened at the depot. People went off to war, family and loved ones came and went and saw each other. But sometimes things of a more violent nature could happen around train depots and train yards, and such was the case in February of 1934 in the middle of the Great Depression when a dice game was being held out on the edge of the depot, and there were several people that had came to this dice game, and one of them was an Archie Lister. He married Ruby Hall in 1929, and he was working for the Civilian Conservation Corps, and he was at this dice game with, among other people, according to the Atmore Advance from that era, that week, there was a Lum Hale, a John Miller, and several other present. In the midst of this dice game, Lum Hale is alleged, according to the Atmore Advance, to have pulled a revolver, and him and allegedly, according to the story, him and John Miller robbed the participants, and then all of a sudden everybody started to run in the middle of all the confusion. Hale fired the revolver. Later on, one of the people that were alleged to have been at the dice game, or at least been in the vicinity of George Holder, looked at his jacket and saw where he had a bullet hole that went right through the jacket, which would say that he had a pretty lucky day. I don't know how he did on the dice game, but he still came out on top. Lum Hale and Miller fled the scene, and a manhunt began with bloodhounds from the prison and from the sheriff's department, and that all started right here where we're at. So now we're going to go to where the manhunt moved on to. I'm going to read you a little bit from the Atmore Advance from that era that talked about the game itself. It said, Lum Hale, age 35, of near Atmore, attempted to hold up a dice game in which he and 7 others were participating. According to reports, Hale and John Miller, 30, of Canoe, attempted to hold up the dice game in a railway station at Canoe, the former covering the players while the latter searched them. One player, George Holder, made a break, and Hale fired at him, the bullet piercing his coat. The other 6 then stampeded, and Hale fired a bullet into Lister's head, according to the Escambia County Sheriff, where Miller would later give himself up, and Hale, armed with a pistol, fled the scene as well with Miller. So let's go and look at where this manhunt went from here. Here we are on the trail of the 2 assailants in the great robbery at the dice game at the Canoe Depot. Allegedly, according to the Atmore Advance accounts from February 1934, Lum Hale and Miller, who were the suspects in this robbery, fled to Miller's house, which would have been in the Robinsonville community, pretty much where that stand of cotton is these days. And that was where they supposedly fled. That's where Miller surrendered to law enforcement and the bloodhounds that they were about to employ to try to catch these guys. Hale fled before they got there. Allegedly, he went into Florida, but the newspaper accounts state that he surrendered at a farmhouse about a mile away, and that he had contacted the sheriff and said he feared mob justice, so that's why he wanted to surrender. Ironically, in this, the Miller residence would have been here. Up on that hill up there would have been where Holder lived, and Holder was the guy that was shot at the robbery, who found a bullet hole in his coat when he got home. Story goes is that he would stay on the back, you could hear him singing through the creek, across the creek, while he was sitting on his back porch singing gospel tunes for years after that. So apparently maybe that event had an effect on him in a different way. Holder ended up moving to the Goodway community, and that's where he lived out the remainder of his life. Hale and Miller were tried by the Circuit Court of Escambia County. Hale was found guilty of murder, although he was tried for capital murder, but he was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence. He had already served time for a murder in Baldwin County prior to that. The convict record shows that he tried to escape on several occasions. In one instance, he was involved in an escape with 10 other inmates when they used a ladder to scale the prison wall. Him and another inmate were recaptured shortly after that. As for what happened beyond that point, there's even one instance where he was given a temporary parole for 2 or 3 days, and he came back and turned himself in like he was supposed to. In another instance, there's a statement about an escape where he went to Atlanta and later turned himself in. And he passed in 1952 at Kilby, although the cause of death is hard to understand. And so ended a tale that began in the Great Depression in Canoe that involved a civilian conservation corps worker who was at this dice game, who was shot in the head during the commission of a robbery, a manhunt that followed, and then a very dramatic, I'm sure, capital murder trial in Bruton that resulted in the conviction of the defendants. Miller served 10 years. He did not receive a life sentence due to his age. I'm sure that factored into it as well. And the story goes is that Mr. Lister was his widow, lived in an area, and where she went from there, she kind of becomes lost to the pages of history. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching Southern Shadows and Dust.